Elena Ward stood in the center of Copper Creek's dusty Main Street, divorce papers trembling in her hands, watching her husband of 7 years ride away with another woman perched side saddle behind him. Grant didn't look back, not once, but his new bride did, her pale face framed by imported lace, her eyes bright with victory. The entire town watched from doorways and windows as Grant pressed a single document into Elena's palm, a deed to their failing homestead. "The house is yours," he'd said, his voice flat as desert stone. "Goodbye." Then he was gone, and Elena was alone, publicly discarded, financially ruined, and about to discover that humiliation was only the beginning. Welcome to a story of survival, dignity, and the kind of love that doesn't rescue. It honors. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far Elena's journey travels. Now let's begin where her old life ended and her real one started. The Arizona sun bore down without mercy as Elena Ward forced her legs to move, one step after another, away from Main Street and toward the edge of town where her cabin sat like a broken promise against the foothills. Her cotton dress clung to her back, soaked through with sweat and shame, and the divorce papers in her hand had already begun to wilt in the heat. Behind her she could hear the whispers starting, soft at first, then louder, like locusts rising from summer grass. Poor thing. What did she expect letting herself go like that? "I heard he met Miss Cross in Tucson. A real lady, they say." Elena's jaw tightened until her teeth ached, but she didn't turn around. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She'd lived in Copper Creek for 7 years, worked alongside these people, traded goods at their stores, attended their church socials. And now, in the span of a single afternoon, she'd become a cautionary tale, a warning whispered to young brides about what happened when a woman failed to keep her husband's interest. The cabin appeared in the distance, small and weathered, its tin roof glinting in the late afternoon light. Grant had built it the summer after their wedding, back when his promises still sounded like truth, and his hands still reached for hers across the dinner table. They'd planned to expand it once the ranch turned profitable, once the cattle herd grew, once the rains came. Once. But the rains had been sparse, the cattle had sickened, and Grant's attention had wandered to cards, whiskey, and eventually to a delicate Philadelphia girl with soft hands and a father's money. Elena climbed the porch steps, noting absently that the third board still groaned under her weight, just as it had for 3 years. Grant had never fixed it. She pushed open the door and stopped cold. The cabin had been ransacked, drawers hung open, their contents scattered across the floor. The trunk at the foot of their bed, her bed now, had been overturned, her few dresses trampled into the dirt. The kitchen shelves were bare, the winter stores of flour and beans gone. And on the table, written in Grant's familiar scrawl on the back of an old receipt, was a note. "Took what I earned. You can keep the rest." Elena's vision blurred. She crossed to the bedroom on legs that felt detached from her body and knelt beside the loose floorboard beneath the window. Her fingers shook as she pried it up, already knowing what she'd find. The tin box where she'd hidden their savings, money she'd earned taking in mending, selling eggs, doing laundry for the mining camp, was gone. 3 years of careful scrimping, of denying herself new boots and fresh fabric, of planning for the future. Gone. She sat back on her heels and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Grant had left her the deed to a failing homestead, a ransacked cabin, and exactly 37 cents she'd tucked into her apron pocket that morning for thread. The sun was setting by the time Elena finally stood and surveyed the damage with clearer eyes. The cabin was still standing. The well still held water. The vegetable garden she'd maintained despite Grant's mockery was still producing, though it would need tending soon. She had shelter, water, and food enough for a few weeks if she was careful. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Grant couldn't take that from her. She spent the evening cleaning, folding her trampled dresses, righting furniture, and sweeping broken glass from where Grant had smashed the window in the back room, whether from spite or haste, she couldn't tell. As darkness fell and the desert cooled, Elena lit a single lamp to conserve oil and sat at the table with the deed spread before her. The property was hers, signed and legal. 40 acres of rocky soil and scrub brush, a cabin that leaked when it rained, a barn with a sagging roof, and a corral that needed mending. The land itself was nearly worthless, Too poor for farming, too isolated for easy ranching, but it was in her name now, not Grant's, not anyone's but hers. A knock at the door made her jump. Her hand instinctively moved to the shotgun Grant had left, probably because it was too old to sell, before she called out, "Who's there?" "Mrs. Ward? It's Reverend Hartley." Elena opened the door to find the Reverend standing on her porch with his hat in his hands, and his wife, Martha, beside him carrying a covered basket. The older woman's face was kind but troubled, her eyes taking in the broken window and the scattered belongings visible through the doorway. "We heard what happened," Reverend Hartley said quietly. "We wanted to make sure you were all right." Elena's throat tightened. She'd prepared herself for judgment, for cold shoulders and closed doors, but kindness threatened to undo her completely. "I'm managing," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Martha stepped forward and pressed the basket into Elena's hands. "There's bread and preserves, some cold chicken, and a bit of butter. I know it's not much, but it's everything," Elena interrupted, her eyes burning. "Thank you." The Reverend cleared his throat. "I want you to know that what Grant did, leaving you like this, taking your savings, it's not right in the eyes of God or man. If you need anything—" "I need work," Elena said bluntly. "Respectable work that pays." The Reverend and his wife exchanged a glance. Martha spoke first, her voice careful. "Elena, dear, I'm not sure the town will, that is, with your situation being what it is." "I'm divorced, not diseased," Elena said, more sharply than she'd intended. "I can read, write, and cipher. I can sew, cook, and manage accounts. Surely someone in this town needs help." Reverend Hartley's expression was pained. "It's not about your capabilities. It's about propriety. The women's social circles, the business owners, they're already talking. Some are saying Grant wouldn't have strayed if—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "If I'd been a better wife," Elena finished flatly. "If I'd been prettier, more refined, more like Miss Cross." "That's not what I think," the Reverend said quickly. "But perception matters in a small town, and right now the perception is that I've been found wanting." Elena straightened her shoulders. "Then I'll change that perception. Thank you for the food, Reverend. Mrs. Hartley, I won't forget your kindness." She closed the door gently but firmly, then leaned against it until she heard their footsteps retreating down the path. Only then did she allow herself to slide down to the floor, the basket clutched against her chest, and cry, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere below her ribs and tasted like grief and fury in equal measure. But by the time the moon rose full and bright over the desert, Elena had dried her tears, eaten Martha's bread, and made herself a promise. She would not sell this land, she would not beg for scraps of sympathy, and she would not disappear to save the town the discomfort of seeing her face. If Copper Creek wanted her gone, they'd have to watch her stay. The next morning, Elena walked into town wearing her best dress, a blue calico that had seen better days but was clean and pressed, and her Sunday hat. She'd braided her dark hair into a coronet, scrubbed her face until it shone, and carried herself like a woman who had nothing to apologize for. Let them stare. She had business to conduct. Her first stop was the Mercantile, where Mr. Jacobson stood behind the counter sorting mail. He looked up as she entered, and his welcoming smile faltered. "Mrs. Ward," he said cautiously, "what can I do for you?" "I need to open a line of credit," Elena said, "just until I can find work. I'll need some basic supplies, flour, beans, lamp oil. I can pay you back within the month." Jacobson's discomfort was visible. He glanced toward the back room where his wife was likely listening. "Elena, I'd like to help, but with your current situation, well, my wife handles the credit decisions and she's very particular about our customer relationships. I've never missed a payment in 7 years. That was when you were married. Now—" He lowered his voice. "Look, I'm sorry about what happened with Grant, but I have to think about my business reputation. If I extend credit to a woman living alone, particularly a divorced woman, people will talk. They'll say I'm being inappropriate, or that I'm taking advantage, or that you're showing basic Christian charity to a neighbor in need," Elena said, her voice like ice. Jacobson's face reddened. "I have a family to think about." Elena set her empty basket on the counter with deliberate care. So do I, Mr. Jacobson. I'm my family now, but I understand. You have a good day. She walked out with her head high and her stomach roiling. 3 more shops. 3 more versions of the same conversation. The baker said his wife didn't approve. The seamstress claimed she had no work to spare. The boarding house owner suggested, delicately, that a woman in Elena's position might find better opportunities in Tucson or Prescott, somewhere she could start fresh without the weight of local history. By noon, Elena was sitting on a bench outside the dry goods store, trying to decide whether to use her remaining coins for flour or lamp oil, when a shadow fell across her lap. "You look like you could use a decent meal." Elena looked up to find a man she didn't recognize, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that touched his collar. He wore working clothes, denim pants and a faded shirt, and his boots were scuffed from hard use, but his eyes were steady and kind, without the pitying softness or cruel curiosity she'd seen in every other face that morning. "I'm fine, thank you," Elena said automatically. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but you don't look fine. You look like you've been fighting with the whole town and losing." He tipped his hat. "Silas Mercer. I work at the Double R Ranch, just north of here, and I saw you walk out of every shop on this street empty-handed, which tells me you're not having a good day." Elena studied him warily. "If you know my situation, then you know why I'm not welcome in those shops." "I know what people are saying," Silas said. "I also know that gossip's usually about half-truth and half-meanness, and the meanness is always louder." He gestured toward the small restaurant across the street. "Come have lunch, my treat. No strings, no expectations, just a fellow human being who figures you could use a hot meal and a conversation that doesn't end with someone telling you to leave town." Every instinct Elena had warned her to refuse, to maintain her dignity, to avoid becoming indebted to yet another man. But her stomach was empty, her pride was already in tatters, and something in Silas Mercer's eyes made her think he might actually mean what he said. "All right," she said finally, "but I pay my own way once I'm able." "Fair enough." The restaurant was nearly empty in the midday lull, and the owner, an older Mexican woman named Rosa, greeted Silas warmly and Elena with careful neutrality. They sat at a corner table, and Silas ordered 2 bowls of stew, fresh bread, and coffee without asking what Elena wanted. "Hope you like beef stew," he said. "Rosa makes the best in the territory." "Anything hot sounds like heaven right now," Elena admitted. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Elena was surprised to find that Silas didn't press her with questions or offer unwanted advice. He simply ate his meal and occasionally glanced out the window at the street beyond, comfortable in the quiet. Finally, Elena spoke. "Why are you being kind to me?" Silas looked at her thoughtfully. "Because I've been where you are. Not exactly the same. I'm not a woman, and I've never been married, but I've been broke, desperate, and convinced the whole world was against me. Someone helped me when they didn't have to. Figured I'd pass that forward. What happened to you?" "I made some bad choices, trusted the wrong people, and ended up with nothing but the horse I rode and the clothes on my back." He took a sip of coffee. "Drifted for a while, worked odd jobs, slept rough. Then I met a rancher named Jack Ridley, who gave me a job and a place to stay without asking too many questions about my past. He's a good man, taught me that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is just show up and help them carry their load for a while." Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "I don't want charity." "Good, because I'm not offering it. I'm offering a hand up, not a handout." Silas pushed his empty bowl aside. "I heard you're looking for work. The Double R needs someone to help with the books. Jack's getting older, and his eyesight's not what it was. It's not fancy work, just tallying expenses, tracking cattle sales, that kind of thing. Pays 40 cents a day, 3 days a week to start. You interested?" Elena's heart leaped, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Why would Mr. Ridley hire me? He must know my situation." "Jack doesn't care about gossip. He cares about whether you can do the job. Can you?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "I kept Grant's books for years. I know ranching accounts." "Then come out to the Double R tomorrow morning. I'll introduce you to Jack and you can show him what you know. If he likes your work, the job's yours." Elena wanted to cry again, but this time from relief rather than despair. "Mr. Mercer, I don't know how to thank you." "Silas?" he corrected gently. And you don't need to thank me. Just show up and do good work. That'll be thanks enough. They finished their meal, and Silas walked Elena back toward the edge of town where the road split, one fork leading to the Double R Ranch, the other to her cabin. As they reached the junction, Elena turned to face him. Silas, I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for a husband or a protector. I'm not helpless, and I'm not going to be grateful enough to mistake kindness for something it isn't. Silas smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Noted. And just so we're clear, I'm not looking to rescue anyone. I'm just offering work to someone who needs it and seems capable of doing it well. Everything else, that's your business, not mine. Elena nodded, satisfied. Then I'll see you tomorrow morning. Looking forward to it. She watched him head down the ranch road, his long stride easy and unhurried, before turning toward her own path home. For the first time since Grant had handed her those divorce papers, Elena felt something other than fear and anger. She felt possibility. Yeah. True to his word, Silas was waiting at the Double R Ranch gate when Elena arrived the next morning. She'd walked the 5 miles from her cabin, carrying a small ledger she'd saved from Grant's ransacking and wearing her most practical dress. Her feet ached in boots that were developing holes, but she kept her expression composed. Jack Ridley turned out to be a weathered man in his 60s with sharp blue eyes and hands gnarled from decades of hard work. He looked Elena over without judgment, then gestured to the ranch office, a small building separate from the main house. Silas says you know your numbers, Jack said without preamble. Show me. Elena spent the next hour reviewing the ranch's accounts, pointing out discrepancies, suggesting a better system for tracking seasonal expenses, and calculating projected profits based on current cattle prices. Jack watched her work in silence, occasionally asking a question or challenging one of her assumptions. By the time she finished, he was nodding. You'll do, he said simply. 40 cents a day, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You start next week. Relief flooded through Elena. Thank you, Mr. Ridley. I won't let you down. See that you don't. Jack stood and extended a hand. Elena shook it, his grip firm and respectful. And for what it's worth, Mrs. Ward, what your husband did was coward's work. You hold your head high. Anyone in this town says different, you send them to me. Elena's eyes burned, but she managed to keep her voice steady. I appreciate that, sir. As she left the office, she found Silas waiting by the corral, watching a young colt test its legs in the morning sun. He glanced over as she approached. How'd it go? I start Monday. Good. He hesitated, then said, I know it's not my place, but your cabin. I noticed the roof when I rode past yesterday. Looks like it's seen better days. I could come by Sunday, patch the worst of it before the rains come. No charge. I'm handy with repairs, and I'd sleep better knowing you've got a solid roof over your head. Elena's first instinct was to refuse, to protect her independence, to avoid owing anyone anything. But practicality won out. The roof did leak, and she didn't have the skill or the materials to fix it herself. All right, she said carefully, but I'll feed you lunch for your trouble. It's only fair. Silas smiled. Deal. That Sunday, he arrived at mid-morning with tools and lumber salvaged from the Double R's scrap pile. Elena watched from the garden as he climbed onto her roof with the easy confidence of a man who'd done this work 100 times. He worked steadily through the heat of the day, replacing broken shingles, sealing gaps, reinforcing weak spots. By early afternoon, Elena had set out a simple lunch: bread, cheese, cold beans, and the last of Martha Hartley's preserves. Silas climbed down from the roof, washed his hands at the pump, and joined her at the small table she'd set up in the shade of the cabin. Roof's solid now, he said between bites. Should hold through the winter rains, maybe longer. I can't tell you how much this helps, Elena said. Truly. It's just a roof. But his tone was pleased. They ate in companionable silence, and Elena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since before Grant left. Silas didn't pry into her past, didn't offer unwanted opinions about her situation, didn't treat her like she was fragile or foolish. He simply existed beside her, steady and undemanding. As he prepared to leave, he paused by his horse and turned back to her. You know, if you need anything else fixed, fence mending, barn repairs, whatever, just let me know. I'm out at the Double R most days, but I can spare a few hours here and there. Why? Elena asked directly. Why are you doing all this? Silas considered the question seriously. Because you remind me of someone I used to know, someone who got dealt a bad hand and refused to fold. She didn't make it. Life got too hard and she gave up. But I always wondered if things would have turned out different if someone had just helped her carry the load for a while. He met Elena's eyes. I can't change what happened to her, but I can help you. And maybe that makes things balance out a little. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. I'm sorry about your friend. Me too. Silas swung into the saddle. See you at the ranch Monday morning. Elena watched him ride away, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the desert scrub. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind, but the quiet, steady kind that builds foundations instead of castles. She had a job. She had a roof. She had food for the next few weeks and the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And she was done apologizing for still being here, still fighting, still breathing. Copper Creek could whisper all it wanted. Elena Ward wasn't going anywhere. Over the following weeks, a routine emerged. Elena walked to the Double R 3 mornings a week, worked through the ranch accounts with meticulous care, and walked home with her pay secured in her apron pocket. The work was satisfying. Numbers made sense in a way people often didn't, and Jack Ridley treated her with gruff respect that never wavered based on town gossip. Silas was often at the ranch when she arrived, and they fell into an easy pattern of greeting each other, exchanging a few words about the weather or the cattle, and then going about their separate tasks. Sometimes he'd bring her water when the day grew hot, or hold her horse's reins while she mounted for the ride home on the days when Jack lent her one of the ranch mares. The town's attitude toward Elena remained cold, but was gradually shifting from active hostility to grudging acceptance. She was still excluded from social gatherings, still whispered about in shop doorways, but she was also becoming a familiar sight. The divorced woman who refused to leave, who walked to work with her head high, who paid her debts and kept to herself. Then, one evening in late October, everything changed. Elena was in her garden harvesting the last of the season's squash when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see Grant riding toward her cabin, alone, his face flushed and his clothes disheveled. Behind him, the sun was setting in streaks of orange and red, painting the desert in shades of fire. Her first instinct was to run inside and bar the door, but she forced herself to stand her ground, the knife she'd been using to cut squash stems still in her hand. Grant reined in his horse and dismounted with less grace than she remembered. Up close, she could see that he'd lost weight, that his eyes were bloodshot, and that his hand shook slightly as he tied his horse to the corral fence. "Elena," he said, and his voice was rough. "We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you." She kept her voice level, her grip on the knife steady. "Well, I have something to say to you." Grant moved closer, and she caught the smell of whiskey on his breath. "This place, you need to sell it back to me." Elena laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You must be joking." "I'm dead serious." Grant's face darkened. "That land is worth more than I thought. There's talk of the railroad coming through, of Copper Creek expanding. If the route goes where they're planning, this property could be worth real money." Understanding dawned, cold and clear. "You gave me worthless land, and now that it might be valuable, you want it back." "It's not like you're doing anything with it," Grant said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "You're barely surviving out here. Sell it to me, and I'll give you enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere people don't know your history." "No." "Elena, be reasonable, Seton." "No," she repeated, louder. "You left me with nothing. You took my savings, my dignity, my place in this community. You don't get to take my home, too." Grant's expression shifted from wheedling to ugly. "You're making a mistake. That land should have never been in your name. I was drunk when I signed those papers, grieving the end of our marriage. You weren't grieving, you were celebrating. The point is," Grant continued, his voice rising, "a judge might see things differently. Might think a woman alone can't properly maintain a property like this. Might think the deed should be voided and the land returned to proper ownership." Elena's blood ran cold. "You're threatening to take me to court." I'm trying to save you the trouble and expense. Sell to me now, and we'll call it settled. Refuse, and I'll do whatever it takes to get what's rightfully mine. This land is mine, legally, and you know it." Grant stepped closer, and Elena raised the knife between them. He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "You've changed, Elena. You used to be softer, sweeter." "I used to be a fool," Elena said. "I'm not anymore. Get off my property." For a long moment, they stared at each other. This man she'd once loved enough to marry, to follow across the territory, to build a life with. Now he was a stranger wearing a familiar face, and the face was twisted with greed and spite. Finally, Grant turned and mounted his horse. "You'll regret this," he said. "Mark my words. You'll lose everything before this is over." He rode away into the gathering darkness, and Elena stood in her garden until the last sound of hoofbeats faded. Then she went inside, barred the door, and sat at her table with her hands shaking and her mind racing. Grant was serious. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. He would come after her land, would use the law and the town's prejudices against her, would do whatever it took to get what he wanted. And he had resources, Vivian's family money, connections in Tucson, the ability to hire lawyers and file legal challenges. Elena had 40 cents a day, 3 days a week, and a small garden. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat up with a lamp burning low, reading and rereading the deed, trying to find any weakness in its language, any loophole Grant might exploit. By dawn, her eyes were gritty and her head pounded, but she'd made a decision. She needed help, real help, the kind that came with knowledge and resources and the willingness to stand against a man like Grant Ward. And there was only one person she could think to ask. Elena found Silas at the Double R just after sunrise, already working in the corral with a young horse. He looked up as she approached, and his expression immediately shifted from calm to concerned. "Elena, what's wrong?" She told him everything, Grant's visit, his threats, his plan to challenge her ownership of the land. Silas listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each detail. "Can he really do that?" Elena asked when she'd finished. "Can he actually take my land?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "There are territorial laws about property ownership, especially for women. Some judges are fair-minded, some aren't. If Grant can find the right judge and the right argument, about the deed being signed under duress or about you being unable to maintain the property, he might have a case. It would be expensive and difficult, but if he's got money backing him..." He trailed off, his expression grim. "So I could lose everything." "Not if we don't let him," Silas said firmly. He glanced toward the ranch house, where smoke was rising from the chimney. "Come on. Jack needs to hear this." Jack Ridley listened to Elena's story with the same focused attention he gave to everything, his weathered face revealing nothing. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Grant Ward's a weasel," Jack said flatly. "Always has been. And weasels bite when they're cornered." He looked at Silas. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Probably," Silas said, "but it's Elena's decision." Both men turned to her, and Elena felt suddenly like a rabbit caught between two hawks, well-meaning hawks, perhaps, but predators nonetheless. "What decision?" Jack spoke carefully. "There's a territorial law that gives a woman stronger property rights if she's married. A husband's name on the deed makes it harder to challenge, especially if the husband has local standing and can prove he's actively working the land." Elena's stomach dropped. "You're suggesting I remarry to protect my property?" "I'm suggesting you consider all your options," Jack said. "And I'm saying that if you did choose to marry someone stable and respected, someone who'd stand with you against Grant's legal games, you'd have a better chance of keeping what's yours." "But it would be a business arrangement," Elena said slowly, trying to understand. "A marriage of convenience." "It could be," Silas said quietly. "Or it could be more, eventually. That would be up to the people involved." Elena looked at him sharply, but his expression was carefully neutral. Still, something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "Are you offering?" "I'm saying I'd stand with you either way, as a friend, as a witness, as whatever you need. But if you're asking whether I'd marry you to help you keep your land..." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "Yes, I would, if you wanted that." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Elena's mind raced. Marriage to Silas, a man she'd known for barely 2 months, whose kindness had been steady, but whose heart was still a mystery. It would solve her immediate problem, would give her legal protection, would put a stop to Grant's threats, would secure her future. But it would also trap her again, bind her to another man, give him power over her choices, her property, her life. And hadn't she sworn, on that terrible day when Grant rode away, that she would never again put her fate in a man's hands? "I need time to think," Elena said finally. "Take all the time you need," Jack said. "But don't take too long. If Grant's serious about this, he'll move fast." Elena nodded and stood, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. Silas walked her to the door, and as she stepped out into the bright morning, he touched her arm gently. "Elena, I meant what I said. I'll help you either way. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not marriage, not anything. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." She looked up at him, this quiet man who'd shown her nothing but steadiness and respect, and felt tears threaten. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" Silas smiled, sad and gentle. "Because you deserve someone in your corner, and because I think you're brave as hell and twice as stubborn, and that's the kind of person worth fighting for." Elena walked home through the golden morning light, her mind turning over possibilities, consequences, futures she couldn't quite imagine. The land stretched out around her, harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and free, and she understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever choice she made would shape not just her immediate future, but the woman she was becoming. She'd been Grant's wife once, defined by his needs and failures. If she married Silas, would she be any different? Or would she finally, truly, be her own person, making choices from strength rather than desperation, building a partnership rather than accepting rescue? The cabin came into view, small and weathered and hers. Elena stopped on the path and looked at it, really looked, seeing not just the broken window and the patched roof and the struggling garden, but the future it represented. Freedom, dignity, choice. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself. Not as Grant's discarded wife, not as Silas's grateful bride, but as Elena Ward, a woman who'd survived humiliation and poverty and was still standing, still fighting, still here. And if that meant marrying for practical reasons, then so be it. But it would be her choice, made with clear eyes and a steady heart. No one would pressure her, manage her, or tell her what she owed in return. She was done being grateful just for being allowed to exist. Elena made her decision 3 days later, not in a moment of desperation, but in the quiet clarity that came from working her garden in the early morning light. She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds from around the winter squash, when she realized that marriage to Silas wasn't surrender, it was strategy. And there was a world of difference between the two. She found him at the Double R that afternoon, mending fence line in the north pasture. He looked up as she approached on foot, the sun at her back, and something in her expression must have told him her answer, because he set down his tools and waited. "I'll marry you," Elena said without preamble. "But I have conditions." Silas nodded slowly. "I'm listening." "The land stays in my name. The deed doesn't change. You'll be my husband on paper and in the eyes of the law, but that property is mine." "Agreed." "I won't be managed or told what to do. I won't ask your permission to make decisions about my own life." "Wouldn't expect you to." "And if this doesn't work, if we find we can't stand each other, or if circumstances change, we dissolve it quietly and go our separate ways. No ugliness, no revenge, no taking what isn't yours." Silas met her eyes steadily. "Elena, I'm not Grant. I won't take from you. I'll only give what you're willing to receive." Something in her chest loosened at his words, but she kept her voice firm. "Then we have an understanding." "We do." Silas hesitated, then added, "But I want you to know something. I'm not doing this just to help you fight Grant. I'm doing it because I think you're remarkable, and I'd be honored to stand beside you, in whatever capacity you'll allow." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "We barely know each other." "True enough. But I know you work harder than any 2 men I've met. I know you're honest even when it costs you. I know you're brave enough to stay when everyone told you to run. He paused. That's enough for me to build on if you're willing. I'm willing to try, Elena said carefully, but I won't pretend to feelings I don't have, not even to make this easier. Good. I'd rather have your honesty than false sweetness any day. They stood in the pasture with the afternoon wind moving through the grass around them, two people making a bargain that was equal parts practical and hopeful. Elena extended her hand and Silas shook it, a promise sealed not with romance but with respect. When? She asked. Soon as possible, before Grant gets his legal machinery moving. Silas glanced toward the ranch house in the distance. Jack knows a judge in Prescott who's fair-minded about women's property rights. We could ride there tomorrow, get it done quick and legal, file the papers before Grant knows what's happened. Elena nodded, her heart beating faster. Tomorrow. By tomorrow evening, she'd be married again, to a man she barely knew, in a ceremony that would be more contract than celebration. But it would be her choice, made with clear eyes and no illusions. Tomorrow then, she agreed. That night, Elena sat at her table and wrote a letter to Martha Hartley, explaining what she was about to do and why. She wrote about Grant's threats, about the legal vulnerabilities of a woman alone, about Silas's offer and her acceptance. She wrote that this wasn't a love match but a partnership, and she hoped, truly hoped, that the Reverend's wife would understand. She sealed the letter and set it aside to deliver in the morning, then turned her attention to more practical matters. She had one decent dress, the blue calico she'd worn to the double R on her first day of work. She mended a small tear in the sleeve, pressed it as smooth as she could with her old iron, and laid it out for mourning. It wasn't bridal white, but she wasn't a bride in the traditional sense anyway. She was a woman making a calculated decision to protect what was hers. Sleep came slowly that night, but when it came, Elena dreamed not of Grant or loss, but of open sky and solid ground beneath her feet. Silas arrived at dawn with 2 horses and a quiet determination in his eyes. Elena was ready, dressed in her blue calico with her hair pinned up and her few important documents, the deed, her marriage certificate to Grant, her divorce papers, secured in a leather satchel. She locked the cabin door behind her and mounted the mare Silas had brought, and together they rode toward Prescott without looking back. The journey took most of the day, through desert scrub that gradually gave way to pine-covered hills. They spoke little, conserving energy for the long ride, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than strained. When they stopped to water the horses at a creek, Silas handed her jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. Not much of a wedding breakfast, he said apologetically. I've had worse, Elena replied, and they shared a small smile. By late afternoon, they reached Prescott, a town larger and busier than Copper Creek, with wide streets and brick buildings that spoke of mining wealth and territorial ambition. Silas led them directly to a modest house on the edge of town where Judge Augustus Blackwell lived with his wife and 3 cats. The judge was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He invited them into his study, listened to their situation with focused attention, and asked Elena directly, "You're doing this of your own free will? No one's forcing your hand?" "I'm doing this to protect my property and my future," Elena said firmly. "Mr. Mercer has offered to help me do that through marriage. I've accepted his offer with full understanding of what it means." Blackwell nodded. "And you understand that marriage is a legal bond with responsibilities on both sides, that you'll be bound by territorial law as husband and wife?" "We do," Silas said. "Then let's make it official." The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Judge Blackwell's wife served as witness, along with a neighbor who happened to be visiting. There were no flowers, no music, no guests beyond those necessary to meet legal requirements. Elena stood beside Silas in her blue calico dress and spoke her vows in a steady voice, promising to honor and respect him. She deliberately left out "obey," and Silas promised the same, his hand warm and calloused when he slipped a simple silver band onto her finger. "I pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Blackwell said. "Mr. Mercer, you may kiss your bride." Silas looked at Elena, a question in his eyes, and she nodded slightly. He leaned in and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to her lips. Their first kiss, chaste and careful, sealing a bargain rather than celebrating passion. But Elena felt something shift in her chest anyway, a recognition that this man was now her husband, for better or worse, and that she'd chosen this path with open eyes. They filed the marriage certificate immediately, and Judge Blackwell made copies for their records. As they prepared to leave, he pulled Silas aside and spoke in a low voice that Elena nonetheless heard clearly. "Jack Ridley vouches for you, so I'm trusting you'll treat this woman right. But know this, if I hear you've mistreated her or taken advantage, I'll make sure every judge in the territory knows what kind of man you are." "Understood, Your Honor," Silas said, "and appreciated." They rode back toward Copper Creek as the sun set, now legally bound as Mr. and Mrs. Silas Mercer. Elena tested the name silently in her mind. Mrs. Mercer. Elena Mercer. It felt strange, like wearing someone else's coat, but not entirely unwelcome. As darkness fell and the desert cooled around them, Silas spoke quietly. "I know we agreed this was practical, but I want you to know. I'll do my best to be a good husband to you, however you define that." Elena considered his words carefully. "And I'll do my best to be a good wife. Though I'm not entirely sure what that means anymore. Maybe we figure it out together." "Maybe," Elena agreed. They reached her cabin, their cabin now, legally speaking, well after dark. Silas helped her down from her horse and unsaddled both animals while Elena lit lamps inside. When he entered, carrying his saddlebags and bedroll, the small space suddenly felt even smaller. Elena's heart raced as reality set in. They were married. Legally, this man had every right to share her bed, to claim his marital privileges, to expect things she wasn't ready to give. But when she looked at Silas, standing awkwardly in the middle of her kitchen with his belongings clutched in work-roughened hands, she saw only uncertainty mirroring her own. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said quietly, "until you're comfortable with other arrangements." Relief and something else, disappointment maybe, flooded through her. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Silas set his belongings down and met her eyes. "Elena, I meant what I said. I won't take what you're not ready to give. We're married on paper, and that's enough for now. Everything else happens when and if you want it to. No pressure, no expectations." Elena felt tears prick her eyes for the 100th time that day. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for, it's just decent behavior." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we tell the town, and things are going to get complicated." After he left, Elena sat at her table, the same table where she'd cried over Grant's betrayal, where she'd made her plans, where she'd decided to fight rather than flee, and tried to process everything that had happened. She was married again. To a good man, she thought, a kind man, but also a man she barely knew, whose presence in her life was now permanent in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. She touched the silver band on her finger, simple and unadorned, and made herself a promise. She would make this work, not for Silas, not for the town, but for herself. She would build a partnership based on honesty and respect, and if love came eventually, she'd welcome it. But she wouldn't manufacture it to satisfy anyone's expectations. Elena Ward Mercer went to bed that night alone, but not lonely, protected, but not possessed, and determined to face whatever came next with the same stubborn courage that had brought her this far. Morning came with unexpected gentleness. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and found Silas outside, building a fire in the yard and setting up a makeshift kitchen. He'd brought supplies from the ranch, bacon, eggs, fresh bread, and was cooking breakfast in the cool dawn air. "Didn't want to presume to use your kitchen without asking," he explained when she emerged, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. "It's your kitchen now, too," Elena said, though the words felt strange in her mouth. "Maybe, but it was yours first." He handed her a cup of coffee, strong and hot. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I expected." Elena sipped the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "You?" "The barn's comfortable enough. I've slept in worse." They ate breakfast in the growing light, planning their strategy for the day. They'd ride into Copper Creek together, present themselves as a married couple, and file the amended property papers with the Territorial Land Office. Word would spread fast. In a town this small, news traveled faster than wildfire. And by evening, everyone would know that Elena Ward had become Elena Mercer. "Grant's going to be furious," Elena said, thinking aloud. "Let him be furious. He's got no legal ground to stand on now." Silas refilled her coffee cup. A married woman with her husband's support can't be pushed around the way a divorced woman living alone can. And if he tries to claim the original deed was invalid, he'll have to explain why he gave property to a woman he was divorcing in the first place. No judge will look kindly on that. Unless he claims you married me just to steal the land yourself. Silas snorted. I'm a ranch hand who lives in a bunkhouse and owns nothing but my horse and saddle. What would I want with 40 acres of scrub? No, Grant can't make that argument stick. We're in the clear, legally speaking. Then why do I feel like we're about to walk into a storm? Because we are, Silas said honestly. But storms pass. And when this one does, you'll still have your land and your dignity. That's what matters. They rode into Copper Creek mid-morning, side by side, and Elena felt every eye in town turn to watch them pass. By the time they reached the land office, a small crowd had gathered, curious, gossiping, speculating. The territorial clerk, a thin man named Warren, who'd worked in that office for 20 years, looked up as they entered. His eyes widened slightly at seeing them together, but his professional demeanor held. Mrs. Ward, he began, then corrected himself. Or is it Mrs. Mercer now? Elena said clearly. As of yesterday, we need to file amended property documentation reflecting my marriage. Warren's eyes flicked between them, calculating. I see. And Mr. Mercer, you're aware that by marrying Mrs. Mercer, you're taking on responsibility for her property and any debts or legal challenges associated with it? I'm aware, Silas said calmly. And willing. Very well. Warren pulled out the necessary forms. I'll need your marriage certificate, the original deed, and proof of identity from both of you. They spent the next hour completing paperwork, signing documents, and answering Warren's careful questions. Through the office window, Elena could see the crowd outside growing larger. She recognized faces, shopkeepers who'd refused her credit, women who'd cut her at church socials, men who'd looked through her as though she didn't exist. And then, with a sick jolt of recognition, she saw Grant pushing through the crowd, his face red with anger and something that looked like panic. Elena! He burst through the office door, breathing hard. What the hell do you think you're doing? Elena stood, instinctively positioning herself between Grant and the desk where their papers lay. I'm filing legal documentation of my marriage. That's none of your concern. The hell it isn't. Grant's eyes fixed on Silas, who'd risen to his feet with deceptive calm. You married her? You married my wife? Your ex-wife, Silas corrected quietly. And yes, I married her. Yesterday, in Prescott, before Judge Blackwell. Grant's face went from red to purple. This is a scheme. You're trying to steal land that rightfully belongs to me. That land belongs to Elena, Silas interrupted, his voice still quiet but now edged with steel. It always has. You gave it to her legally, in front of witnesses, when you divorced her. What she does with it now is her business, not yours. She can't just marry the first man who comes along and think that protects her. Actually, I can, Elena said, finding her voice and her courage. I'm a free woman, Grant. I can marry whoever I choose. And I chose Silas. The crowd outside was pressing closer now, faces at the windows, listening to every word. Elena could see Reverend Hartley and Martha among them, the Reverend's face grave, Martha's hand pressed to her mouth. Grant turned his fury back on Elena. You'll regret this. You think this ranch hand can protect you? He's nothing. He has nothing. When I'm done, you're done now, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Jack Ridley standing there, his weathered face set in hard lines. Behind him stood 3 other ranchers Elena recognized, respected men with land and influence. Jack moved into the office with the measured pace of someone who knew his authority. Grant Ward, I've known you since you first came to this territory, and I've watched you be a disappointment at every turn. You gambled away your ranch, drove off a good woman, and now you're trying to bully your way into taking what's not yours. This is none of your business, Ridley. It became my business when you threatened my employee and my friend. Jack gestured to the men behind him. We've all heard about your plans to challenge Elena's ownership of her land. We're here to make clear that if you pursue that challenge, you'll find yourself facing more than one woman and her new husband. You'll face every decent rancher in this county who's tired of watching you act like a spoiled child. One of the other ranchers, a grizzled man named Tom Peterson, stepped forward. We've already been to see Judge Morrison in town, explained the situation. He's made it clear he won't hear any case you bring that's based on questioning a legal deed or a legitimate marriage. Says it would set a bad precedent for women's property rights in the territory. Grant looked around the office, his face twisting with rage and something that might have been fear. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and everyone knew it. This isn't over, he said, but his voice had lost its threatening edge. Yes, it is, Elena said quietly. Go back to Vivian, Grant. Build whatever life you're going to build with her money, but leave me alone. You gave up any right to concern yourself with my life when you handed me those divorce papers. For a long moment, Grant just stared at her, and Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of what they'd once had. But then his expression hardened again, and he turned on his heel and shoved his way through the crowd outside. The office fell silent, except for the scratch of Warren's pen as he continued filling out their paperwork, unmoved by the drama that had just unfolded. Jack approached Elena and spoke quietly. You all right? I'm fine, Elena said, and realized she meant it. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. She'd faced Grant without flinching, and she'd won. Good. Jack clapped Silas on the shoulder. You picked a strong one, son, don't forget that. I won't, Silas promised. Warren finished the paperwork and stamped it with official seals. All done. The property at the junction of Copper Creek and Sunset Ridge remains in the name of Elena Mercer, with notation of marital status change, legal and binding. Elena took the papers with hands that didn't shake and tucked them safely into her satchel. It was done. She was protected, secured, safe from Grant's schemes and the law's inequities. As they left the office, the crowd parted to let them through. Some faces were still hostile, some merely curious, but some, like Martha Hartley's, were openly supportive. Martha caught Elena's hand as she passed. I got your letter, Martha whispered. I understand why you did what you did, and for what it's worth, I think you chose well. Thank you, Elena whispered back, squeezing the older woman's hand. They rode back to the cabin in silence, the morning's confrontation settling over them like dust after a storm. When they arrived, Silas dismounted and helped Elena down, his hand steady at her waist. You did good in there, he said, standing up to Grant like that. I had help, Elena replied. I had you, and Jack, and those other ranchers. I wasn't alone this time. No, Silas agreed. You weren't. And you won't be, going forward. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that they were truly partners now, bound not just by law, but by shared battle. Elena looked at this man who'd stood beside her against her ex-husband's fury, who'd promised protection without demanding control, who'd given her space to breathe even as he offered his name and his strength. Silas, she said carefully, I know we agreed you'd sleep in the barn, but the nights are getting colder, and it seems foolish for you to freeze out there when there's a perfectly good cabin. Silas's expression was carefully neutral. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we're husband and wife, and maybe it's time we started acting like it, at least in terms of sharing living space. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but pushed forward. I'm not saying, that is, I'm not ready for everything that marriage usually means, but maybe we could start with just not sleeping in separate buildings? A slow smile spread across Silas's face, genuine and warm. I think that sounds reasonable. And Elena, we move at whatever pace you're comfortable with. No rush, no pressure. Thank you, she said softly. That night, Silas slept on a pallet near the stove while Elena took her usual bed. It was a small step, but it felt significant, a move toward partnership, toward trust, toward something that might eventually become more than a marriage of convenience. As Elena drifted off to sleep, she heard Silas's steady breathing across the room and felt, for the first time in months, truly safe. Not because a man was protecting her, but because she'd chosen an ally and built a partnership based on mutual respect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the town's continued gossip, the practicalities of merging their lives, the slow work of building trust, and understanding. But tonight, Elena Ward Mercer slept peacefully in her own cabin, on her own land, with her future finally, truly, her own. And that was enough. The weeks that followed their marriage settled into a rhythm that surprised Elena with its ease. Silas rose before dawn each day, built the fire, and started coffee while she dressed and pinned up her hair. They ate breakfast together in companionable silence. Then he'd ride to the Double R while she tended the garden and worked on improving the cabin. 3 days a week, she still kept the ranch books, and Silas would ride home with her in the evenings, the two of them talking about cattle prices and weather patterns, and the small details of their separate days. It was domestic in a way Elena's marriage to Grant had never been. Grant had expected to be served, entertained, catered to. Silas simply existed alongside her, contributing equally to the work of living. He repaired the barn door without being asked, brought home lumber scraps to patch weak spots in the cabin walls, and spent his Sunday afternoons helping Elena extend her garden fence to keep out the rabbits that had been decimating her winter vegetables. But for all the comfort of their routine, they remained careful with each other, polite, respectful, and cautious not to presume too much. Silas still slept on his pallet by the stove. They still addressed each other with formal courtesy, and when their hands accidentally touched while washing dishes or passing tools, they both pulled back quickly, as though the contact might burn. Elena told herself this was exactly what she wanted: partnership without passion, companionship without complication. But on cold November nights, when she lay alone in her bed listening to Silas's breathing across the room, she wondered if she was protecting her heart or simply walling it off from any chance of healing. The town's attitude toward their marriage remained mixed. Some people, like the Hartleys and Jack Ridley, treated them with genuine warmth and acceptance. Others watched with barely concealed skepticism, clearly waiting for the arrangement to fail or for scandal to emerge. And a few, including the women's social circle that had never fully welcomed Elena, even before her divorce, made their disapproval known through pointed snubs and cold shoulders. Elena was leaving the Mercantile one afternoon in mid-November when she encountered 3 of these women on the boardwalk. Catherine Morrison, the banker's wife, stood flanked by 2 younger women whose names Elena could never quite remember. All 3 wore fashionable dresses and matching expressions of disdain. "Mrs. Mercer," Catherine said, her tone making the name sound like an accusation. "How convenient that you found a new husband so quickly after your divorce." Elena stopped, her basket of supplies heavy on her arm. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Morrison. I trust you're well." "Well enough, though I confess I'm troubled by the example being set in our community." Catherine's eyes were cold. A woman barely divorced, taking up with a ranch hand and calling it marriage. It sets a poor precedent for proper moral behavior. "My marriage to Silas is legal and recognized by the territorial government," Elena said evenly. "I'm not sure what moral questions you're raising." One of the younger women tittered. "It's just that some of us remember when you were married to Grant. You seemed quite devoted to him then. How quickly affections change when there's property involved." The implication was clear and cutting. Elena felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her voice steady. "Grant divorced me, took my savings, and left me destitute. I married Silas because he's a good man who offered partnership and respect. If you find that morally questionable, perhaps you should examine your own values." Catherine drew herself up, offended. "There's no need to be rude, Mrs. Mercer. We're simply concerned for the moral fabric of Copper Creek. Women like you, women who remarry hastily, who live in questionable circumstances, make it difficult for respectable ladies to maintain proper standards." "Women like me?" Elena repeated slowly, feeling anger build beneath her careful composure. "You mean women who work for their living? Women who've been abandoned and had to fight to survive? Women who don't have the luxury of husband's money and social position to protect them from reality? I mean women who don't respect themselves enough to maintain proper dignity," Catherine snapped. "Grant may have made mistakes, but at least Vivian has the breeding and refinement to be a proper wife to him. You were always too common for his aspirations." The words landed like a slap, and for a moment Elena couldn't breathe. Too common, not good enough, found wanting. All the old wounds Grant had left, now being torn open again by women who'd never faced hardship or humiliation. "My breeding and refinement are none of your concern," Elena said, her voice shaking now with suppressed fury. "And neither is my marriage or my life. You've made your opinions clear, Mrs. Morrison. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She pushed past them, her head high despite the tears burning behind her eyes. Behind her, she heard Catherine's voice, deliberately loud enough to carry, "Mark my words, that marriage won't last. Men like Silas Mercer don't stay with difficult women, no matter how much land is involved." Elena made it to the edge of town before the tears came, hot and bitter, and full of all the rage and shame she'd been holding back for months. She found a spot behind the livery stable where no one could see her and let herself cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears of grief, but the ugly, choking sobs of someone who'd been fighting too hard for too long. She didn't hear Silas approach until his hand touched her shoulder, gentle and tentative. "Elena? I saw you leave town. What happened?" She tried to compose herself, to wipe her face and pull her dignity back together, but the tears wouldn't stop. "Nothing. Just town gossip. I'm fine." "You're not fine." Silas turned her to face him, his expression concerned. "Talk to me." So she did. She told him about Catherine Morrison and her friends, about their casual cruelty and their judgment, about being called common and difficult and morally questionable. The words spilled out between sobs, and Silas listened without interrupting, his jaw growing tighter with each detail. When she finally ran out of words, he pulled her into his arms, the first real embrace they'd shared since their wedding day. Elena stiffened for a moment, then let herself lean into his strength, let herself be held without having to hold herself together. "They're wrong," Silas said quietly into her hair. "Every word they said about you is wrong. You're not common, you're extraordinary. You're not difficult, you're strong. And you're not morally questionable. You're one of the most honest people I've ever met." "They think I married you for your protection," Elena said, her voice muffled against his chest. "They think I'm using you." "Let them think whatever they want. We know the truth." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his thumbs gently wiping tears from her cheeks. "We know this marriage is real, even if it's not traditional. We know we're partners. That's all that matters." "Is it real?" Elena asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Sometimes I wonder if we're just playing house, pretending to be married while keeping each other at arm's length." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his hand still cupping her face. "What do you want it to be?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Elena's heart raced as she considered her answer. Not the safe answer, not the careful answer, but the true one. "I want it to be real," she whispered. "I want to stop being so careful with you. I want to stop sleeping on opposite sides of the room like we're strangers. I want—" She stopped, afraid to say more. "What do you want, Elena?" Silas's voice was gentle, but insistent. "I want a real marriage, with trust and partnership, and maybe, eventually—" She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Silas understood. "Eventually love?" he asked softly. "Maybe. If that's even possible after everything." "It's possible." Silas leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. "Elena, I've been careful with you because I thought that's what you needed. But if you're ready for more, if you want more, then I'm ready too. I've been ready since the day I first saw you standing in that garden, refusing to give up." Elena closed her eyes, feeling something break open in her chest. Not painfully, but like ice melting after a long winter. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of being hurt again, of trusting someone and having them use that trust against me." "I know. And I can't promise I'll never hurt you because people hurt each other even when they don't mean to. But I can promise I'll never betray you the way Grant did. I'll never take from you without giving back. I'll never make you feel small to make myself feel big." He pulled back to look at her directly. "Elena, I'm falling in love with you. Have been for weeks now, and I'll wait as long as you need me to wait, but I wanted you to know." The words settled over her like a benediction, healing wounds she hadn't known were still bleeding. Silas loved her. Not for her property or her usefulness, or because she was convenient, but because of who she was, strong and stubborn and refusing to break even when the world seemed determined to break her. "I don't know if I love you yet," Elena said honestly, "but I think I could. I think I'm starting to." That's enough for now. Silas smiled, warm and genuine. We've got time to figure out the rest. They rode home together in the fading afternoon light, and when they reached the cabin, Silas helped her down from her horse and kept his hands at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Elena didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up at him and made a decision. Move your things into the bedroom, she said quietly. I'm tired of sleeping alone. Silas's expression was careful. Elena, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Not for everything. Not yet. But I want you close. I want to wake up next to my husband instead of across the room from a stranger who happens to live in my house. All right, Silas said. If you're sure. I'm sure. That night, they lay side by side in Elena's bed, their bed now, careful not to touch but aware of each other's presence in a way that felt both terrifying and right. Elena stared at the ceiling, listening to Silas breathe, feeling the warmth of his body next to hers. Thank you, she said into the darkness. For what? For being patient with me, for not pushing, for letting me come to this in my own time. Elena, you don't need to thank me for basic decency. Yes, I do. Because it's not as common as you think. She turned her head to look at him in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. Grant never cared about my timing or my comfort. Everything was about what he wanted, when he wanted it. You're different. I should hope so. Silas turned to face her, propping himself up on one elbow. Elena, I need you to understand something. This marriage, it's not just practical for me anymore. It hasn't been for weeks. I care about you, about your happiness, your safety, your dreams, and I'll spend however long it takes proving to you that not all men are like Grant. Elena reached out tentatively and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I'm starting to believe that. He caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. Good. They fell asleep like that, hands loosely intertwined, and Elena dreamed not of loss or betrayal, but of growing things, gardens expanding, buildings rising, futures unfolding with possibility. The next morning brought unexpected news. Jack Ridley rode to their cabin before breakfast, his face grave. We've got trouble, he said without preamble. Grant's been talking to lawyers in Tucson. Seems he found some territorial statute about women's property rights that might give him an opening. Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of statute? Something about land transferred during divorce proceedings, requiring a male co-signer if the woman remarries within 6 months. The idea being that if she remarries that quickly, the original transfer might have been made under duress or false pretenses. Jack dismounted and accepted the coffee Silas handed him. It's an old law, barely enforced, but Grant's trying to argue it applies to your situation. But I remarried to protect myself from his challenges, Elena protested. That's not duress, that's self-defense. I know that, and any reasonable judge would know that. But Grant's not looking for reasonable. He's looking for technical. Jack sipped his coffee. His lawyer's arguing that because you remarried so quickly after the divorce, and because the property was part of the divorce settlement, the whole thing should be reviewed. He's asking for the deed to be temporarily frozen while the court investigates. Silas swore quietly. Can he do that? He can ask. Whether a judge grants it is another matter. Jack looked at Elena. I'm sorry, girl. I thought we'd put this to rest. Elena felt the familiar rage building again, but this time it was colder, more focused. What do we need to do? We need testimony from people who can vouch for the legitimacy of your marriage. People who can say that you and Silas married for genuine partnership, not just to circumvent property laws. Jack set down his cup. We need to show that this is a real marriage, not a scheme. It is real, Elena said firmly, then glanced at Silas. At least it's becoming real. Then we make sure everyone knows it, Silas said. Starting with the people in this town who matter, the ones who have influence and respect. Over the next week, they mounted their defense not in a courtroom, but in the community. Jack Ridley spoke to other ranchers, vouching for Silas's character and work ethic. Reverend Hartley made quiet visits to influential families, reminding them of Christian charity and the importance of supporting vulnerable members of the community. Martha Hartley organized a quilting circle specifically to work on a wedding quilt for Elena and Silas, a public declaration of support that carried weight in the women's social circles. Elena and Silas themselves became more publicly affectionate, making a point of walking through town together, attending church services as a couple, and generally presenting themselves as genuine partners. It felt strange at first, performing their marriage for an audience, but Elena soon realized they weren't performing at all. The touches came naturally, Silas's hand at the small of her back, Elena's fingers on his arm, small gestures of affection that had become habitual without either of them noticing. But Grant wasn't idle. Word reached them that he'd been approaching townspeople with his own narrative, that Elena had seduced Silas specifically to steal property that rightfully belonged to Grant, that she was a manipulative woman who destroyed one marriage and was now corrupting another good man. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon when Elena and Silas were leaving church. Grant was waiting on the steps, Vivian beside him looking pale and uncomfortable. The gathered congregation fell silent, sensing confrontation. "Silas," Grant said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I want to talk to you, man to man." "We've got nothing to discuss," Silas said evenly. "I think we do. See, I've been hearing things about you, about your past, about why you drifted into Copper Creek with nothing but a horse, and the clothes on your back." Grant's smile was sharp and mean. "Seems you've got some history you haven't shared with your new wife." Elena felt Silas tense beside her, but his voice remained calm. "My past is my business. Not when it affects property and legal proceedings. Not when it raises questions about your character and intentions." Grant looked around at the watching crowd. "Did you know your husband was accused of claim jumping up in Montana? That he left 3 steps ahead of a vigilance committee?" Gasps rippled through the congregation. Elena turned to look at Silas, but his expression was unreadable. "That's a lie," Silas said quietly. "Is it?" "I've got documents that say otherwise, witness statements, a warrant that was never formally withdrawn." Grant pulled papers from his coat pocket. "Seems you're not quite the upstanding citizen you've been pretending to be." Elena's mind raced. Was this true? Had Silas lied about his past? But even as doubt flickered, she remembered everything she knew about the man standing beside her, his kindness, his patience, his steady integrity. Whatever had happened in Montana, there had to be more to the story. "Let me see those documents," Jack Ridley said, stepping forward from the crowd. Grant hesitated, then handed them over. Jack scanned them quickly, his expression hardening. "These are 3 years old, and they're signed by a land speculator named Dutch Henry, who was later arrested for fraud and forgery. Everyone in Montana Territory knows his accusations were manufactured to drive legitimate settlers off valuable claims." "That's convenient," Grant sneered. "Blame a dead man for my evidence." "Dutch Henry's not dead. He's in territorial prison in Montana. I can wire the warden if you'd like confirmation." Jack handed the papers back to Grant. "And I can wire the sheriff in Billings who cleared Silas's name 2 years ago when the truth came out. But you already knew that, didn't you, Grant? You just hoped no one here would bother to verify." Grant's face went red. "I'm trying to protect this community from a con man." "You're trying to destroy an honest man's reputation because you're bitter about losing property you threw away in a fit of selfishness," Jack interrupted. "And you're using forged documents and disproven accusations to do it. That makes you the con man here, not Silas." The crowd's murmuring had shifted from shocked to hostile, and it was directed at Grant now, not Silas. Elena saw several men she recognized, ranchers and businessmen, moving closer with expressions that suggested Grant should leave before things got ugly. But Elena had had enough of letting others fight her battles. She stepped forward, putting herself between Silas and Grant. "You need to stop this," she said, her voice carrying across the churchyard. "You need to accept that I'm not yours anymore, that this land isn't yours, and that your attempts to control me through intimidation and lies are over." "Elena, you don't understand what you're involved in. I understand perfectly. I'm involved in a marriage with a good man who treats me with respect and dignity. I'm involved in building a life on land that legally belongs to me. And I'm involved in standing up to a bitter small man who can't accept that he lost everything through his own bad choices." Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. "You want to challenge my property rights? Fine. Take me to court. Let a judge examine the evidence and the law. But stop spreading lies about my husband. Stop manipulating this community and stop acting like you have any claim on my life. Grant looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him, at Vivian, who was pulling on his arm and whispering urgently, at the Reverend who stood on the church steps with clear disapproval on his face. "This isn't over," Grant said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Elena replied. "It's been over since the day you handed me those divorce papers. You just haven't accepted it yet." Grant turned and stalked away, Vivian hurrying after him. The crowd watched them go, then slowly began to disperse, their sympathies clearly with Elena and Silas now. Reverend Hartley approached them, his expression kind. "Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Mercer, I think you've more than demonstrated the strength of your partnership today. If anyone in this town still questions the legitimacy of your marriage, they weren't paying attention." As they walked home later that afternoon, Elena finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Was any of it true? About Montana?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. The claim-jumping accusation was real, yes, but it wasn't true. Dutch Henry and his men wanted the land I'd staked, so they forged evidence that I'd stolen it from someone else. By the time the truth came out, they'd already run me off and taken over my claim. I lost everything I'd worked 2 years to build. He looked at her directly. "That's why I was drifting when I came to Copper Creek. Why I had nothing. I'd been cleared legally, but I was broke and tired and didn't have the energy to start over again up north." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if you knew I'd been accused of something like that, even falsely, you might not trust me." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I should have told you. I'm sorry." Elena studied his face, the honesty in his eyes, the regret in his expression, the vulnerability he was showing her. "Grant was wrong about you," she said finally. "You're not a con man. You're just a man who's been hurt, same as me." "Yeah," Silas agreed. "Same as you." She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Then we understand each other." They walked the rest of the way home hand in hand, and when they reached the cabin, Elena turned to Silas with sudden clarity about what she wanted. "I'm done being afraid," she said. "I'm done protecting myself from the possibility of being hurt. Grant tried to destroy me with lies today, and all he did was show me how different you are from him." She stepped closer. "Silas, I want this marriage to be real in every way. I'm ready for that, if you are." Silas's eyes darkened with understanding and desire, but he still asked, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, not the careful, chaste kiss from their wedding, but a real kiss, deep and searching and full of weeks of restrained want. Elena kissed him back with equal fervor, letting herself feel everything she'd been holding at bay: attraction, trust, the beginnings of love. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Elena Mercer, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." "You already have," Elena whispered. "You proved it by being patient, by being kind, by standing beside me instead of trying to stand over me." That night, their marriage became real in every sense of the word, and Elena discovered that intimacy with someone who truly respected her was nothing like what she'd experienced with Grant. This was partnership, mutual desire, genuine connection. This was what marriage was supposed to be. And as she fell asleep in Silas's arms, safe and satisfied and more at peace than she'd been in years, Elena finally let herself believe that happy endings were possible, even for difficult, common, divorced women who refused to disappear. The morning after everything changed between them, Elena woke to find Silas already up, standing at the window watching the sun rise over the desert. She studied his profile in the early light. The strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the quiet strength in the way he held himself. This was her husband, truly now, and the knowledge filled her with equal parts contentment and terror. "You're awake," Silas said, without turning, somehow sensing her gaze. "How long have you been standing there?" "Not long, just thinking." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Elena, about last night. If you're about to apologize or ask if I regret it, don't," Elena interrupted, sitting up and pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "I meant what I said. I'm done being afraid. Silas crossed to the bed and sat on its edge, his hand finding hers beneath the covers. I wasn't going to apologize. I was going to say that everything's different now. We can't go back to being careful with each other, keeping safe distance. This is real, and that means it can hurt us both. I know, Elena said quietly, but I'd rather risk being hurt by something real than stay safe in something empty. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Then we move forward together. Whatever comes. Whatever comes, Elena agreed. What came, 3 days later, was a formal summons delivered by the territorial marshal. Grant had made good on his threat and filed a legal challenge to Elena's property ownership, claiming the deed transfer had been made under duress and that her hasty remarriage was evidence of fraud. The case was set to be heard in 2 weeks before Judge Morrison in Copper Creek. Elena read the summons twice, her hand shaking with fury rather than fear. He's actually doing this. After everything, he's still trying to take what's mine. Silas read over her shoulder, his jaw tight. Then we fight him, properly this time, with lawyers and evidence and every legal tool we can find. We don't have money for lawyers, Elena said flatly. Grant has Vivian's family backing him. We have 40 cents a day and a homestead that's barely profitable. We have more than that. Silas set the summons aside and pulled Elena to her feet. We have truth on our side. We have friends. And we have each other. That's got to count for something. By evening, word of the summons had spread through Copper Creek, and Jack Ridley arrived at their cabin with unexpected news. Behind him rode Tom Peterson and 2 other ranchers, all carrying the weathered determination of men who'd decided to take a stand. We've been talking, Jack said without preamble, about Grant's lawsuit and what it means. Not just for you two, but for every woman in this territory who owns property or might someday need to. Tom Peterson dismounted and handed Elena a leather folder. We've pooled resources to hire you a lawyer. Samuel Tucker out of Prescott. He's good, fair-minded, and he's handled property cases before. He'll be here tomorrow to start building your defense. Elena's throat tightened. I can't accept this. It's too much. You can, and you will, Jack interrupted firmly. This isn't charity, Elena. This is investment. If Grant succeeds in taking your land through legal tricks and technicalities, every woman's property rights become questionable. Every widow, every divorced woman, every female landowner in the territory becomes vulnerable to the same tactics. He gestured to the other men. We're protecting our own interests here. Our wives, our daughters, our neighbors. You're just the battleground we're choosing to defend. Besides, Tom added with a slight smile, we're tired of watching Grant Ward act like he owns this territory. Man's been a thorn in everyone's side since he arrived. Time someone put him in his place. Silas shook each man's hand, his expression grateful. We won't forget this. Don't need you to forget, just need you to win. Jack tipped his hat to Elena. Samuel Tucker's good, but he'll need you to be honest with him about everything. The marriage, the timeline, your reasons. Don't pretty it up or hide anything. Truth's your best weapon here. Samuel Tucker arrived the next afternoon, a lean man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a methodical manner. He sat up at their kitchen table with papers and law books spread before him and spent 3 hours questioning Elena and Silas about every detail of their relationship, from Silas's first offer to help with the roof, to their wedding in Prescott, to the evolution of their marriage from practical arrangement to genuine partnership. The prosecution's going to argue that your marriage is a sham, Tucker said bluntly. They'll say you married specifically to circumvent property laws, that there's no genuine affection or partnership, that it's purely a business arrangement designed to defraud Grant Ward of his rightful property. His rightful property? Elena's voice rose with indignation. He gave it to me in the divorce settlement, in front of witnesses, with a legal deed, which he now claims he signed under emotional duress, drunk with grief over the end of his marriage. Tucker's tone was dry. His lawyers already submitted an affidavit from Vivian Ward now, stating that Grant was distraught during the divorce proceedings and not in his right mind when he transferred the property. Silas made a disgusted sound. The man rode out of town with his new bride the same day he handed over those papers. He wasn't distraught. He was eager to be rid of Elena. We'll need witnesses who can testify to that, Tucker said, making notes. People who saw Grant that day, who can speak to his demeanor and mental state. We'll also need testimony about the legitimacy of your marriage. People who can say they've observed genuine affection and partnership between you. Over the next week, they prepared their case with meticulous care. Martha Hartley agreed to testify about the day of the divorce, describing how Grant had seemed celebratory rather than grief-stricken. The territorial clerk, Warren, provided documentation showing that Grant had filed the deed transfer himself, with no signs of coercion or impairment. And half a dozen townspeople, including the Reverend Hartley, Jack Ridley, and even Rosa from the restaurant, offered statements about observing Elena and Silas's relationship develop from respectful friendship to genuine marriage. But Tucker warned them that testimony alone might not be enough. Judge Morrison is conservative about women's property rights. He's not hostile, but he's cautious. He'll want to see clear evidence that this marriage is legitimate and that the property transfer was fair and legal. The lawyer looked at Elena seriously. Mrs. Mercer, I need to ask you something difficult. If the judge rules against you, if he invalidates the deed and returns the property to Grant, what will you do? Elena felt Silas's hand tighten on hers under the table, but she answered without hesitation. I'll appeal. I'll fight it every way I can. That land is mine, and I won't let Grant steal it through legal manipulation. Good, Tucker said, because that's the kind of determination we need to show. You're not a helpless woman being pushed around by circumstances. You're a property owner defending your legal rights against bad faith challenges. The night before the hearing, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay beside Silas in the darkness, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios and potential arguments, until he finally pulled her close and spoke quietly into her hair. Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it together. If we lose the land, we'll build something new somewhere else. If we win, we'll make this place into everything we've dreamed it could be. But either way, we're together. That's what matters. I can't lose this land, Elena whispered. It's all I have left of my dignity, of my independence. If Grant takes it from me, he won't take your dignity or your independence. Those are yours no matter what happens with 40 acres of desert scrub. Silas tilted her face up to meet his eyes in the moonlight. Elena, you were strong and independent when you had nothing but a ransacked cabin and 37 cents. You'll be strong and independent no matter what Judge Morrison decides tomorrow. The land doesn't define you. But it represents something, Elena insisted. It represents me refusing to disappear, refusing to be pushed out, refusing to let Grant win. And you've already done that. You've already won in every way that matters. Tomorrow's just making it official. Elena wanted to believe him, but fear sat cold in her stomach as dawn broke on the day of the hearing. She dressed in her best dress, the blue calico she'd been married in, carefully mended and pressed, and pinned her hair into a coronet that made her look older, more dignified. Silas wore his only suit, borrowed from Jack Ridley and slightly too short in the sleeves, but he carried himself with quiet confidence that made him look every inch the respectable husband. The hearing was held in Copper Creek's small courthouse, an adobe building that also served as the town hall and meeting place. By the time Elena and Silas arrived with Samuel Tucker, the room was already packed with townspeople, some there to support them, others clearly aligned with Grant, and many just hungry for the spectacle of a public legal battle. Grant sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a slick-looking man from Tucson named Randolph Hayes, who wore an expensive suit and an expression of supreme confidence. Vivian sat behind them, her face pale and her hands twisted in her lap. She looked thinner than Elena remembered, and unhappy in a way that suggested her marriage to Grant wasn't living up to its promised prosperity. Judge Morrison entered promptly at 9, a stern man in his 60s who'd served on the territorial bench for 20 years. He surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious displeasure. "This is a property dispute, not a theatrical performance," he said sharply. "I'll have order and respect in my courtroom, or I'll clear the gallery. Understood?" The crowd settled into uneasy silence. Morrison took his seat and reviewed the case documents before him, then looked up. "Mr. Hayes, you may present your case." Grant's lawyer stood and launched into a lengthy argument about the deed transfer being invalid due to Grant's emotional state, about Elena's suspiciously quick remarriage, and about the questionable character of Silas Mercer, carefully avoiding direct mention of the Montana accusations that had already been disproven, but implying enough to plant doubt. "The facts are clear, Your Honor," Hayes concluded. "Mr. Ward, in the depths of despair over his failed marriage, made an impulsive decision to transfer valuable property to his former wife. Before he could rectify this error in judgment, she hastily married a drifter with no ties to the community, specifically to strengthen her legal claim to land that rightfully belongs to my client. This court should invalidate the fraudulent deed transfer and return the property to its rightful owner." Samuel Tucker rose for the defense, his manner calm and methodical. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's narrative relies on several false premises. First, that Grant Ward was distraught during the divorce proceedings. Multiple witnesses will testify that Mr. Ward was, in fact, eager to end his marriage and begin his new life with Miss Cross. Second, that Mrs. Mercer married Mr. Mercer specifically to defraud the plaintiff. The timeline and circumstances of their relationship tell a different story entirely." Over the next 2 hours, Tucker called witnesses who systematically dismantled Grant's case. Martha Hartley testified about Grant's celebratory demeanor on the day of the divorce. Warren the clerk confirmed that Grant had filed the deed transfer himself, sober and clear-headed, with no indication of impairment. Jack Ridley spoke about Silas's character and work ethic, and about observing the development of genuine affection between him and Elena. Then Tucker called Elena herself to the stand. "Mrs. Mercer," he began formally, "please tell the court about the circumstances of your divorce from Grant Ward." Elena took a breath and spoke clearly, without embellishment or emotion. She described Grant's abandonment, the ransacked cabin, the stolen savings, the humiliation of being publicly discarded. She described the town's reaction, the difficulty finding work, the constant struggle to survive. "And when did you first meet Silas Mercer?" Tucker asked. "The day after my divorce was finalized. I was sitting outside the dry goods store trying to decide whether to spend my last coins on flour or lamp oil when he offered to buy me lunch." "Did he know who you were? Your situation?" "He knew I'd been divorced. He said he'd been broke and desperate himself once and someone had helped him. He wanted to pass that forward." Tucker walked her through the timeline of their relationship, Silas's help with repairs, his recommendation for the bookkeeping job, the gradual building of trust and friendship. When he asked about their decision to marry, Elena answered honestly. "Silas told me that marriage would give me stronger legal protection against challenges to my property ownership. He offered to marry me if that's what I needed, but he also made it clear that I didn't owe him anything in return, not gratitude, not affection, nothing. It was my choice, freely made." "And have you come to regret that choice?" "No," Elena said firmly. "Marrying Silas is the best decision I've made since coming to Copper Creek. He's been a true partner in every sense, respectful, supportive, and honorable." Grant's lawyer cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint her marriage as calculated fraud, but Elena held her ground. When Hayes suggested she'd seduce Silas specifically to gain a legal advantage, she responded with quiet dignity. "Mr. Hayes, I married Silas because he's a good man who offered partnership without demanding control. If that's seduction in your eyes, then perhaps you should examine your own views about what marriage should be." A ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by Judge Morrison's sharp look. Hayes pressed on, but Elena refused to be rattled. She answered every question truthfully, never backing down from the reality that her marriage had begun as a practical arrangement but had evolved into genuine partnership and love. Then Silas took the stand, and Grant's lawyer made his fatal mistake. "Mr. Mercer," Hayes said with barely concealed disdain, "isn't it true that you arrived in Copper Creek with no property, no prospects, and a questionable past?" "I arrived with a horse, my skills, and my integrity," Silas replied evenly. "I'd been falsely accused of a crime in Montana and cleared of all charges. I came to Arizona Territory to start fresh." "How convenient that you found a recently divorced woman with property in need of a husband." "I found a remarkable woman being treated badly by this town. I offered friendship and eventually partnership. I never asked for her property, never wanted control of her land, and never saw her as anything but an equal. Yet you married her mere weeks after meeting her. Most people would call that suspiciously hasty." Silas leaned forward, his expression intense. Most people haven't watched someone fight as hard as Elena has to keep her dignity and independence. Most people haven't seen a woman refuse to give up even when the whole world seemed determined to break her. I married her because I recognized strength when I saw it, and because I wanted to stand beside someone that brave. Hayes tried to interrupt, but Silas wasn't finished. You want to know if I married her for her land? That 40 acres is rocky, marginal ground that barely supports vegetables, let alone cattle. It's not worth the legal fight we're having today. But the woman who refused to give up that land, she's worth everything. I married Elena because she's extraordinary, and because I knew that if I didn't, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. The courtroom was silent. Hayes seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Even Judge Morrison looked thoughtful, his stern expression softening slightly. Tucker called one final witness, Vivian Ward. She took the stand reluctantly, her hand shaking as she was sworn in. Mrs. Ward, Tucker said gently, you submitted an affidavit stating that your husband was distraught during his divorce proceedings. Do you stand by that statement? Vivian glanced at Grant, then away. I wrote what Grant told me to write. I didn't know him during his first marriage. I can't actually speak to his emotional state during the divorce. So your affidavit was based on your husband's claims, not your own observations? Yes, Vivian whispered. And in your own observations since marrying Mr. Ward, how would you describe his feelings about his former wife and the property he transferred to her? Vivian was silent for a long moment, clearly warring with herself. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. He's obsessed with that land, not because he wants it, but because he can't stand that Elena has it. He says she doesn't deserve it, that she's too common to own property, that she needs to be put in her place. She looked up, meeting Elena's eyes across the courtroom. I'm sorry. I thought he loved me, that we'd build a good life together. But all he cares about is punishing you for surviving his abandonment. Grant shot to his feet. Vivian, what the hell are you— Sit down, Mr. Ward, Judge Morrison said sharply. Mrs. Ward, continue. Vivian straightened her shoulders, something like relief crossing her face. Grant gave Elena that land because he thought it was worthless. He wanted her to fail, to struggle, to eventually give up and disappear. When she didn't, when she found work and remarried and built a life anyway, it drove him crazy. This lawsuit isn't about property rights or legal technicalities. It's about a man who can't accept that the woman he discarded is thriving without him. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Hayes tried to salvage the situation through redirect examination, but the damage was done. Vivian had exposed the true motivation behind Grant's challenge, and in doing so had destroyed his case. Judge Morrison called for order and announced he would render his decision after a brief recess. Elena sat with Silas and Samuel Tucker, her heart pounding, while Grant and his lawyer huddled in urgent conversation. Vivian had left the courtroom immediately after her testimony, and Elena wondered if the other woman would face consequences for her honesty. 15 minutes later, Judge Morrison returned and the courtroom fell silent. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today, Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room. This case raises important questions about property rights, marriage law, and the protections afforded to women under territorial statute. Elena held her breath, Silas's hand tight in hers. However, Morrison continued, the facts are straightforward. Grant Ward voluntarily transferred property to Elena Ward as part of their divorce settlement. The deed was properly filed and witnessed. Mrs. Ward, now Mrs. Mercer, subsequently married Silas Mercer, which is her legal right as a free woman. The timing of that marriage, while quick, is not evidence of fraud without additional supporting facts. The judge looked directly at Grant. Mr. Ward, your claim that you transferred the property under emotional duress is undermined by multiple witnesses who observed you on the day in question. Your lawyer's insinuations about Mr. Mercer's character were thoroughly refuted, and your own wife's testimony makes clear that this lawsuit is motivated not by legitimate legal concerns, but by personal animosity. Morrison turned to Elena. Mrs. Mercer, the property in question was legally transferred to you and remains legally yours. Your marriage to Mr. Mercer, regardless of its original practical motivations, is clearly a legitimate partnership that has evolved into genuine affection and commitment. This court finds no grounds to invalidate either the property transfer or your marriage. Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully she felt dizzy. Silas's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. The plaintiff's challenge is dismissed with prejudice, Morrison concluded. Mr. Ward, you are hereby ordered to cease all legal harassment of Mrs. Mercer regarding this property. Should you file any further frivolous challenges, I will hold you in contempt. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with finality, and the courtroom erupted in noise, some cheering, some protesting, everyone talking at once. Elena turned to Silas and found him grinning, his eyes bright with relief and triumph. We won, she said, barely believing it. You won, Silas corrected. You stood up and fought and refused to be pushed around, and you won. Samuel Tucker was shaking their hands, accepting congratulations from supporters, already discussing the legal precedent the case might set for other women facing similar challenges. Jack Ridley pushed through the crowd to embrace Elena like a daughter. Martha Hartley was crying happy tears. And across the courtroom, Grant stood frozen, his lawyer already packing up to leave, his face twisted with defeat and rage. He caught Elena's eye, and she saw the exact moment he finally understood. She was beyond his reach now, beyond his control, beyond his ability to hurt. She'd won not just the legal battle, but her complete freedom from him. Elena lifted her chin and met his gaze steadily, refusing to gloat or show triumph. She simply looked at him until he turned away, beaten, and walked out of the courthouse alone. As the crowd slowly dispersed and Elena and Silas prepared to leave, Vivian appeared in the doorway, a small traveling bag in her hand. She approached them hesitantly. Mrs. Mercer, I wanted to apologize for my part in all this, and to thank you. Thank me, Elena said, surprised. For what? For showing me what it looks like when a woman refuses to be broken. I've been watching you for months, watching you survive and fight and build a life on your own terms. It gave me courage to finally tell the truth today. Vivian glanced back toward where Grant had exited. I'm leaving him, taking the stage to Tucson tomorrow and then the train back east to my family. Whatever happens after this, I needed you to know that your strength helped me find mine. Elena felt unexpected compassion for this woman who'd been part of Grant's scheme, but was clearly as much a victim as a perpetrator. I hope you find what you're looking for, Vivian, and I hope wherever you go, you remember that you deserve better than Grant Ward. Vivian nodded, tears streaming down her face, and hurried away. Elena watched her go, feeling the weight of the past months finally lifting from her shoulders. You ready to go home? Silas asked quietly. Elena looked up at her husband, this good man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd helped her fight without trying to fight for her, who'd given her partnership instead of rescue. I'm ready. They walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunshine, and Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years, genuine, uncomplicated joy. The land was hers. The marriage was real. The future was open and full of possibility. She'd fought for everything she had, and she'd won. They rode home through the golden afternoon light, and Elena felt as though she were seeing the landscape with new eyes. The desert scrub looked less harsh now, more beautiful in its stark resilience. The mountains in the distance seemed protective rather than isolating. Even the rocky soil of her 40 acres looked rich with possibility as they turned onto the path leading to the cabin. What are you thinking about? Silas asked, watching her face. I'm thinking that for the first time since Grant left, I'm not afraid of what comes next. Elena smiled. I'm actually looking forward to it. Good, because I have some ideas about what comes next, if you're willing to hear them. They unsaddled the horses and settled on the porch steps, the evening air cooling around them. Silas pulled out a folded paper from his jacket pocket, a rough sketch of buildings and fences, carefully drawn. I've been thinking about this place, he said, spreading the sketch between them, about what it could be. Right now it's barely supporting us, but with some investment and hard work, we could build something real here. Elena studied the drawing, seeing corrals and a proper barn, an expanded garden with irrigation channels, even a small bunkhouse. This would take money we don't have. Maybe not as much as you think. Jack's offered me a partnership stake in the Double R, small percentage but with profit sharing. And Tom Peterson mentioned he's looking for someone to manage his horse breeding program, which would pay steady wages. Silas pointed to the sketch. Between my earnings and your bookkeeping work, we could save enough to start building within a year. We could raise horses here, maybe some cattle, make this land actually profitable. You've thought this through, Elena said, surprised and touched by the level of detail. I've had a lot of time to think while sleeping in the barn, Silas admitted with a slight smile. And then while lying next to you in bed trying not to wake you. Elena, I know this started as a marriage of convenience, but I want to build a real life with you. Not just survive together, but thrive. Create something that's ours. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, affection and gratitude mixing with something deeper. I want that too. But Silas, I need you to understand, I don't want to just be your helper or your wife who supports your dreams. I want to be an equal partner in whatever we build. I wouldn't want it any other way. Silas took her hand. Your ideas, your work, your vision, they matter just as much as mine. More maybe, since this is your land we're building on. Our land, Elena corrected softly. I think I'm ready to put your name on the deed too, as true partners. Silas looked startled. Elena, you don't have to do that. I know how hard you fought to keep this property in your name, and now I'm choosing to share it with you. Not because I have to, not because the law requires it, but because I want to. Because you've earned my trust, and because a real partnership means sharing everything, the risks and the rewards. She squeezed his hand. Will you let me do that? If you're sure, Silas said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. I'm sure. They sat on the porch as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, making plans and dreaming aloud about the future. They talked about building a proper house to replace the cabin, about raising horses that could be sold to the army or to ranchers, about expanding the garden into something that could supply the whole territory. They talked about the life they wanted to create together, not the desperate survival Elena had been living, but something rich and full and chosen. Over the following weeks, their plans began taking shape. Silas accepted Jack's partnership offer at the RR and took on Tom Peterson's horse management contract. Elena expanded her bookkeeping services to 2 additional ranches, working from home 3 days a week. The money wasn't substantial yet, but it was steady, and they began saving every spare coin toward their building fund. The town's attitude toward them shifted noticeably after the court victory. People who'd once crossed the street to avoid Elena now nodded politely when they passed. Shopkeepers who'd refused her credit now welcomed her business. The women's social circle, led by a chastened Catherine Morrison, extended a cautious invitation for Elena to join their charitable sewing group. Elena accepted the invitation, though not without trepidation. She arrived at Martha Hartley's home on a Tuesday afternoon to find a dozen women gathered in the parlor, including Catherine and her friends, who'd been so cruel months earlier. Mrs. Mercer, Catherine said stiffly as Elena entered, thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, Elena replied, equally formal. They sat in awkward silence for a moment before Martha, ever the peacemaker, spoke up. Elena, we're working on quilts for the miners' families up in Jerome. Several of the men were injured in a cave-in last month, and their wives are struggling. We thought you might help with the stitching. Elena took the offered fabric and needle, settling into the work she'd done countless times before. As the afternoon progressed and conversation flowed around her, she realized something had fundamentally changed. These women weren't treating her with warmth exactly, but they were treating her with respect. She'd proven she couldn't be pushed out or broken down, and in doing so, she'd earned a place in their community whether they liked it or not. Catherine approached as the gathering was ending, her expression uncomfortable. Mrs. Mercer, I owe you an apology for my behavior these past months. I said cruel things born of ignorance and prejudice. I hope you can forgive me. Elena studied the other woman, seeing genuine remorse beneath the stiff formality. I appreciate the apology, Mrs. Morrison, and I accept it, though I hope in the future you'll remember that a woman's worth isn't determined by her marital status or her husband's approval. I'm learning that lesson, Catherine said quietly. Watching you fight for your rights, it's made me think differently about a lot of things. As Elena walked home that evening, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. She'd gone from being the town's scandal to being, if not quite accepted, at least acknowledged as someone who couldn't be ignored or dismissed. It wasn't complete victory, but it was progress. Winter settled over Copper Creek with surprising gentleness that year. The rains came steady rather than violent, filling the well and greening the desert. Elena's garden, carefully tended and protected, produced enough vegetables to see them through the cold months with plenty to trade for other necessities. Silas worked steadily at his various jobs, coming home tired but satisfied each evening to find Elena cooking dinner or working on her bookkeeping by lamplight. They developed routines and rhythms, learning each other's habits and preferences. Silas discovered that Elena sang while she worked in the garden, old hymns and folk songs in a clear, sweet voice. Elena learned that Silas read voraciously, borrowing books from anyone who'd lend them and reading by firelight until his eyes grew heavy. They shared these small intimacies along with larger ones, their marriage deepening from practical partnership into genuine love. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Silas showed Elena a letter he'd received from the Territorial Land Office. "There's a section of adjacent property coming up for auction in March. 20 acres to the north of us with better soil and access to the creek." Elena read the letter carefully. "It would nearly double our holdings, but the starting bid is $300. We have almost 200 saved. If we can scrape together another 100 by March." Silas trailed off, watching her face. "We'd be overextending ourselves," Elena said slowly. "One bad season, one injury, one unexpected expense, and we'd lose everything." "True. But if we don't take the risk, we stay small forever, never quite making enough to get ahead. Always one disaster away from failing anyway." Silas leaned forward. "Elena, I know you've been burned by risks before. Grant's gambling, his failed schemes. But this is different. This is calculated investment in our future, not desperate grasping at get-rich-quick dreams." Elena stared into the fire, weighing fear against ambition. Everything in her screamed to play it safe, to protect what they had, rather than risk it for what they might gain. But that same caution had kept her trapped in a failing marriage for years, had made her accept Grant's neglect and disrespect because leaving seemed too risky. She'd learned the hard way that sometimes the greatest risk was refusing to take any risks at all. "Let's do it," she said finally. "Let's bid on that land." Silas grinned and pulled her into his arms. "We'll make it work. I know we will." They spent the next 6 weeks working harder than Elena had thought possible. Silas took on extra jobs, breaking horses, repairing fences, hauling freight. Elena expanded her bookkeeping services and began teaching basic mathematics to the children of ranchers too far from town to attend regular school. Every penny they earned went into their land fund, and by mid-March they had $287 saved. They were still $13 short of the minimum bid. "We could ask Jack for a loan," Silas suggested as they counted their savings for the third time, hoping the total would somehow change. "No," Elena said firmly. "He's already done so much for us. I won't ask him for more." "Then we find another way to earn $13 in 5 days. Silas ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I could work extra shifts at the Double R, but that won't pay out until after the auction." Elena thought for a moment, then stood decisively. "I'm going to sell the old cabin furniture. The pieces Grant and I bought together. I don't want them anyway. They hold too many bad memories." "Elena, that's your furniture. Your things. They're just objects, and I'd rather have the land than a bedroom set that reminds me of my failed first marriage." She was already mentally inventorying what could be sold: the bed frame, the dresser, the kitchen table, and chairs. Someone will buy them. She was right. By the day of the auction, they'd sold the old furniture for $18, giving them a total of $305. They rode into Copper Creek that morning with their savings secured in a leather pouch, and determination written on both their faces. The auction was held at the land office, with a surprising number of bidders present. Elena recognized several ranchers who owned adjacent properties, as well as a few speculators from Tucson looking to buy cheap and sell high when the railroad came through. "Don't let them intimidate you," Silas whispered as they took their places. "We have as much right to that land as anyone." The auctioneer, a portly man named Jenkins, called the proceedings to order and described the property in detail. 20 acres with creek access, suitable for grazing or cultivation, currently unoccupied. Starting bid, $300. $300, Elena called out clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. $325, countered a Tucson speculator. $350, said Tom Peterson, who owned land on the other side of the creek. The bidding rose quickly, $400, $425, $450. Elena's stomach sank as the price climbed beyond their means. She and Silas exchanged helpless looks as their dreams of expansion evaporated with each new bid. Then Jack Ridley's voice rang out from the back of the room. $500. Everyone turned to look at him. Jack walked forward calmly and stood beside Elena and Silas. And I'm bidding on behalf of the Mercer family. Elena, Silas, consider it a wedding present. You can pay me back when and if you're able, but either way, that land should be yours. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Jack, we can't accept. You can and you will, Jack said firmly. I've got no children of my own, and you two are as close as I'm likely to get. Let an old man invest in the future he wants to see. The other bidders, recognizing both Jack's determination and his deeper pockets, backed off. Jenkins called for any final bids, received none, and brought his gavel down. Sold to the Mercer family for $500. Congratulations, Mrs. Mercer. Mr. Mercer? Elena couldn't speak. She simply threw her arms around Jack in a fierce embrace while Silas shook the old rancher's hand with obvious emotion. Thank you, Silas said, his voice rough. We'll pay you back. Every penny. I know you will, Jack said, but there's no rush. Build something good on that land first. The money can wait. They filed the paperwork that afternoon, officially adding 20 acres to their holdings. On the ride home, Elena felt something settle in her chest, a sense of permanence and belonging she'd never experienced before. This wasn't just land they were occupying temporarily. This was property they'd fought for, saved for, invested in. This was home. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the desert and new growth appearing in Elena's expanded garden. Silas began construction on a proper barn using lumber they bought with their combined savings, working weekends and evenings to frame the structure. Elena started making plans for irrigation channels that would bring creek water to their fields, sketching designs and calculating costs. And one morning in late April, Elena woke feeling queasy and realized her monthly courses were late. Very late. She waited 3 more days to be sure, then told Silas over breakfast. I think I'm pregnant. He dropped his fork, his eyes wide. You're sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there. Elena felt a complicated mix of joy and fear. I know we didn't plan for this so soon. Silas was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. We didn't plan for any of this. The marriage, the land, building a ranch together. But it's all turned out better than I could have imagined. A baby is just the next wonderful, terrifying, unexpected blessing. Elena laughed through sudden tears. You really think we can do this? Raise a child while building a ranch while paying back Jack? I think we can do anything as long as we're together, Silas said firmly. We've already proven that. Dr. Reynolds confirmed the pregnancy a week later, pronouncing Elena healthy and estimating the baby would arrive in late November. The news spread through Copper Creek with surprising speed, and Elena found herself the recipient of unexpected kindness. Martha Hartley organized a collection of baby clothes and blankets. Catherine Morrison donated a beautifully crafted cradle her own children had outgrown. Even women who'd barely spoken to Elena before offered advice and well wishes. You've become one of us, Martha explained when Elena expressed surprise at the outpouring of support. A property owner, a wife, soon to be a mother. You're building the kind of life this territory was founded on. Hard work, family, community. People respect that, even if they were slow to see it at first. As summer heat settled over the desert, Elena's belly grew round and Silas finished the barn. They moved their horses into proper stalls and began the work of establishing their breeding program, purchasing 2 quality mares with money earned from Silas's work with Tom Peterson. The garden flourished under Elena's careful tending, producing enough vegetables to sell at the mining camps and still have plenty for their own use. They were eating dinner one evening in August when unexpected visitors arrived. Vivian Ward, looking healthier and happier than Elena had ever seen her, accompanied by a quiet, bookish man she introduced as Thomas Brennan, a schoolteacher from Philadelphia. "I hope you don't mind us calling," Vivian said nervously. "I'm in town settling some legal matters, and I wanted to see you, to thank you properly for what you did." Elena invited them in, curious and wary in equal measure. Over coffee, Vivian explained that after leaving Grant, she'd returned east and eventually met Thomas through mutual friends. They'd married the previous month and were moving to Prescott, where Thomas would be teaching at the new territorial school. "I wanted you to know that your courage changed my life," Vivian said earnestly. "Watching you stand up to Grant, fight for your rights, refuse to be diminished, it showed me what was possible. I left him, filed for annulment on grounds of fraud and coercion, and started over. And I found real love, the kind based on respect and partnership." She glanced at Thomas with obvious affection. "The kind you and Silas have." "I'm glad you found happiness," Elena said sincerely. "And I'm glad you found the strength to leave. That took real courage." "I learned it from you," Vivian replied softly. After they left, Elena stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Silas joined her, his arms settling comfortably around her expanding waist. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "I'm thinking about how much has changed in a year. Last summer I was alone, broke, convinced my life was over. Now I have you, our land, a baby on the way, friends, community, purpose." Elena leaned into his warmth. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst things that happen to us clear the path for the best things to come." "You think Grant leaving you was a good thing?" Silas asked carefully. "I think it was a necessary thing. If he'd stayed, I would have stayed too, trapped in a marriage that diminished me, accepting scraps of affection and calling it love. His betrayal hurt terribly at the time, but it also freed me to become who I was meant to be." She turned to look at Silas directly. "It freed me to find you, to build this life, to be truly happy for the first time." "I'm glad he was fool enough to let you go," Silas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." The baby arrived on a cold November night, 3 weeks earlier than Dr. Reynolds had predicted. The labor was long and difficult, with Martha Hartley and the doctor attending while Silas paced anxiously in the next room. But when dawn broke on the new day, Elena held a healthy baby girl in her arms, small but strong, with dark hair and her father's steady eyes. "What should we name her?" Silas asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and staring at his daughter with wonder. Elena thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope, because that's what she represents. Hope for the future, hope that good things can follow bad, hope that we can build something lasting and true." "Hope Mercer," Silas tested the name. "I like it." The winter months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but Elena had never been happier. She and Silas navigated new parenthood together, taking turns walking the floor with a fussy baby, supporting each other through exhaustion and uncertainty. Jack Ridley became an honorary grandfather, visiting weekly to check on his girls and bringing practical gifts like firewood and winter supplies. By the time spring returned, Elena had recovered her strength and Hope was growing fat and healthy. The ranch was beginning to show real profits from their horse breeding program, and they'd managed to pay back half of what they owed Jack. The garden was planted and thriving, the barn was full of quality stock, and their small cabin, now expanded with a room for the baby, felt like a true home. One afternoon in late May, Elena was working in the garden with Hope sleeping in a basket beside her when she saw a familiar figure riding toward the property. Her heart clenched as she recognized Grant, older and somehow smaller than she remembered, riding alone on a tired-looking horse. Silas emerged from the barn, moving to stand beside Elena with a protective hand on her shoulder. "What do you want, Grant?" Grant dismounted slowly, his movements stiff. Up close, Elena could see that the past year hadn't been kind to him. His clothes were worn, his face lined with bitterness and defeat. "I came to talk to Elena," Grant said, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "You can say whatever you need to say with me present," Silas said, firmly. Grant's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine. Elena, I needed to. He stopped, struggling with words. I made mistakes. A lot of them. I threw away something good because I thought I deserved better, and I've spent the past year learning that I was wrong. Is this an apology? Elena asked carefully. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but yes, I'm sorry. Sorry for leaving you with nothing. Sorry for stealing your savings. Sorry for trying to take your land. Sorry for being too stupid and prideful to see what I had until it was gone. He looked at the cabin, the barn, the thriving garden. You've built something good here, better than anything we had together. We had nothing together, Elena said quietly. We had a marriage where I gave everything and you took it for granted. What I have now is different because it's built on partnership and respect. Grant flinched but didn't argue. You're right. You always deserve better than I gave you. He glanced at Silas. Take care of her. She's stronger than she looks. But strength shouldn't have to stand alone. She'll never stand alone again, Silas promised. Grant mounted his horse, moving like a man much older than his years. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're happy. You earned it. He rode away without looking back, and Elena watched him go with a sense of finality. This was the last piece of her old life being laid to rest, the last confrontation, the last wound being closed. Grant Ward had no more power to hurt her, no more claim on her thoughts or her peace. Are you all right? Silas asked softly. I'm perfect, Elena said, and meant it. She looked around at everything they'd built, the home, the land, the family, the future. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. As summer arrived, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. She listed the original 40 acres, the land Grant had given her in the divorce, for sale. Silas questioned the choice at first, worried she might regret giving up the property she'd fought so hard to keep. I'm not giving it up out of defeat, Elena explained. I'm selling it because we've outgrown it. We have better land now, more space, better water access. And there's a young widow in town, Sarah Mitchell, who needs a fresh start. Her husband died in a mining accident and left her with 2 children and nothing else. This land could give her what it gave me, a chance to build something of her own. You're going to sell it to her specifically? Silas asked. I'm going to offer it to her at a fair price, with terms she can actually meet. The way I wish someone had helped me when I was desperate. Elena smiled. Passing forward the same kind of help you gave me when we first met. Sarah Mitchell accepted the offer with tears of gratitude, and by July the sale was complete. Elena used half the proceeds to pay off the remainder of their debt to Jack Ridley, and the other half to begin construction on a proper house to replace their expanded cabin, a real home with space for their growing family and the future they were building together. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch of their new house watching Hope take her first stumbling steps in the yard, Elena reflected on the incredible journey of the past 18 months. Do you ever regret it? She asked Silas. Marrying a divorced woman with nothing but problems and 40 acres of scrubland? Silas laughed. Every day I wake up grateful that I was smart enough to see past the problems to the remarkable woman carrying them. He pulled her close. Elena, you gave me everything I didn't know I was missing. Home, family, purpose, love. I'm the one who should be asking if you regret marrying a drifter with a questionable past and empty pockets. Never, Elena said firmly. You gave me back my dignity and my future. You gave me partnership instead of ownership, respect instead of control. You gave me a real marriage. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set and Hope babbled happily to herself, chasing a butterfly through the grass. In the distance, horses grazed in their pasture, and the newly planted fields showed the first green shoots of autumn crops. The barn stood solid and strong. The house was taking shape with its frame rising against the desert sky, and everything they could see belonged to them, earned through hard work, protected through courage, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and love. Elena Ward Mercer had survived abandonment, poverty, humiliation, and legal battles. She'd been called common, difficult, and morally questionable by people who didn't know her strength. She'd been underestimated, dismissed, and told to disappear. But she'd refused every step of the way, fighting for her dignity and her rights until the world had no choice but to acknowledge her. And now, sitting on the porch of her own home on land she'd fought to keep and expanded through determination, with a husband who honored her and a daughter who represented hope itself, Elena understood that the greatest victory wasn't winning the court case or keeping the property. The greatest victory was becoming the woman she was always meant to be: strong, independent, capable, and deeply, genuinely loved. She'd been discarded by a man who thought she was worthless, and in the process of proving him wrong, she'd discovered her true worth. She'd lost everything and rebuilt something better. She'd been broken and healed stronger at the fracture lines. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and growing things, and Elena breathed it in deeply. This was her land, her life, her family, her future. Grant hadn't ruined her when he left. He'd merely cleared the doorway for her real life to begin. And what a life it was becoming. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky and Silas scooped up a sleepy Hope to carry her inside for bed, Elena took one last look at the horizon. Somewhere out there, other women were facing abandonment, fighting for their rights, struggling to survive in a world that wanted them to disappear quietly. She hoped they found the same strength she'd discovered, the same courage to fight, the same stubborn refusal to give up. Because if Elena Ward Mercer could survive and thrive, build a ranch and raise a family, and turn 40 acres of scrubland into a home worth fighting for, then anyone could. All it took was determination, partnership, and the willingness to believe that being discarded by the wrong person might just be the first step toward finding the right one. She rose and followed her husband and daughter inside, closing the door on her past and stepping fully into the future she'd earned. And for the first time in her entire life, Elena was exactly where she belonged: home.